a topic involving children, because I think that, certainly as a parent, I think it's the most important issue before us right now is what they're trying to do to our children. And as a dad of three beautiful kids, I can tell you it scares me just how our society is trying to push children to go down the road of these so-called gender-affirming care practices. And it's just absolutely ridiculous and dangerous to our children. And it's an honor to welcome back to the show Dr. Stanley Goldfarb. He is chairman of Do No Harm and professor of medicine at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania, right here in our backyard. Dr. Goldfarb, thank you for joining me in your hometown of Philadelphia. I appreciate it.
Great to be with you again.
Now, the California Senate passed a bill out of committee on Monday rejecting evidence-based medicine in favor of ideologically charged gender-affirming care. Now, will you tell us what this bill would do?
Well, basically, it would allow schools and other individuals to start children down this path, which is often an irreversible path of changing their bodies and altering their body parts, ultimately, without the parents really having anything to do with it, sort of keeping the parents blind to the changes that are proposed for their children, which is obviously an awful idea.
So the parents would have no consent whatsoever with this if a kid wants to do something that would permanently damage their body? I mean, I thought it used to be if a kid wanted an aspirin, you had to give consent as a parent.
Yeah, I think we want parents to be totally involved in their children's care. Unfortunately, in this situation of so-called gender-affirming care, sometimes the parents are foursquare behind this, even though it's a terrible idea, and children can't possibly give consent, and nor really can parents give proper consent with real understanding of what's happening here. But certainly the idea that the parents should be kept in the dark on this is just a terrible idea. And, it's the idea that the parents are not in charge of their children's development and upbringing, but rather, in this case, the state is determining that, which is really awful.
Dr. Goldfarb, it's infuriating as a parent to hear that, because my job as a parent is to guide my kids to make decisions that they won't regret when they get older. And children make a lot of bad decisions. It's why kids are not allowed to drink alcohol and do drugs. And there's a lot of restrictions on what kids can do because their brains are still developing. So why would we allow children to go down this road knowing that their brains have not fully developed yet and they may change their mind at some point, but at that point it becomes irreversible?
No, it's a terrible idea. What's happened in Europe now, really, it points the way to how this should be handled. So there are 5 European countries, and most recently a very extensive report by Hilary Cass, the chief pediatrician in the United Kingdom, and that, a very eminent physician there, have all come to the conclusion that we just do not have evidence that these very troubled, often very troubled and vulnerable children would benefit at all from going through these kinds of either social transitions or medical transitions, particularly in their adolescence, that there's no benefit to them that has really been documented in the literature. And obviously there's the potential for great harm. Just to point out the kind of harm that's potential, there now are over 50 lawsuits in various stages of development by children that have gone through gender affirmation, have had their bodies changed either through surgery or through the effects of these hormones that they're administered, and have realized it's a terrible mistake, and now they wish that they hadn't done that, and are blaming the physicians in the medical centers that told them that this was the right thing for them, when in fact nobody really understood how to treat these children properly. And in fact, almost certainly, according to the European nations, to this Cass review, which was done in the United Kingdom, what these children need is extensive psychological treatment. Surgery is not the answer to psychological problems, but that's what's going on here.
And the so-called puberty blockers, can we talk about those for a minute? Because as I understand it, first of all, they're not even approved for puberty blocking, I guess, for lack of a better term. They're also very dangerous, and they also could have some irreversible effects as well, right?
Yeah, the point is puberty is an important, normal part of development, and blocking children from going through puberty is associated with all sorts of complications, including particularly in brain development. There's been some real questions about it, as well as in the development of their bones. The drugs have been used in the past for children that would start to go through puberty at a very early age. And so temporarily they would get the drugs, but then be allowed to go through puberty. The point of using these drugs is to either block puberty for its entirety or to block puberty for a short bit, and then the children start to go on large doses of these sex-changing hormones and altering their development forever, really. And the drugs almost 98% of the children who start on puberty blockers end up on hormones. So the idea that it gives some sort of pause to allow further thinking just isn't the case. And now these drugs have been completely banned in the United Kingdom. That was one of the recommendations of the Cass report, and that's been the case for a while now.
Dr. Stanley Goldfarb is with me. He is chairman of the organization called Do No Harm, DoNoHarmMedicine.org. I'm grateful to have you on the show today. The other thing, too, is when you talk about the psychological help that these kids need, I completely agree with that point. I mean, we're talking about children who are, in fact, going through something. But the problem is, as I see it, politically speaking, there's an entire element of people that don't even want to entertain that could be a consideration. So, for example, if I'm a parent, they want to keep me in the dark. They don't even want me to know if my kid is going through this at school, because the idea that it could be something else besides just the child's truth, the idea that it could be psychological, like the child could be suffering from mental illness, or could just be doing it for attention, or it could be something. You can't entertain those other possibilities. So people are willing to sacrifice the health of our children to try to push a political narrative, and I find that to be just so disturbing, dangerous, and wrong for the child.
No, absolutely. It's called conversion therapy. So it's analogizing from the idea of trying to take children that are adults or even gay adults and try to convert them into being so-called, heterosexuals. And they've analogized from that to trying to give these children enough insight that they understand why they're confused about their gender and to treat their other underlying medical problems. It's been seen in many clinics that as many as 30% of the children that go through these so-called gender-affirming treatments are autistic. A number of them have been abused. A number of them have depression. And the idea that unless they are allowed to go through this gender affirmation treatment, that they're going to commit suicide has just been shown not to be true. The leading psychiatrist in Finland, who's been an expert in this area and has worked with these children for many years, points out that this claim in the United States that you either can have a dead son or a live daughter or vice versa is simply just not true. And that the problem for these children is that they have a great burden of mental illness, and they need to be treated for that rather than to go through hormones or even surgical procedures, which unfortunately goes on as well.
And as you guys point out too on your site at Do No Harm, and I'm looking at a lot of this stuff too. I mean, much of this is being pushed through medical schools where they're teaching future doctors, and you also have stories on your site about how medical schools are adopting very far left ideology, but they're teaching doctors that this is the way it's supposed to be, so that the doctors will graduate medical school with a medical degree, and they'll have an entirely different take than the take of Dr. Stanley Goldfarb. That's not good.
No, you're correct. I mean, when you look at some of the anatomy materials that they have in their coursework, when they talk about the reproductive system, they make these statements that, there is no one sex. There are various kinds of sexes. There are intersex. No, this is all wrong. There are two sexes, and that's the case. And if people have confusion about their gender, they need to be understood. They need to be talked to. They need to undergo psychological treatment to understand why they're confused about this. Is there a child someplace that their view of their gender is correct, and they're going to want to live like that the rest of their lives? Maybe, but we can't harm 100 children to find that one, maybe 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 children that, in fact, this might be something that works well for them. We can't harm a whole generation of children based on ideology and based on these very false ideas of what's beneficial here. It really is a tragedy that's going on. We're going to have lots of children that are harmed by this. These lawsuits are going to accumulate where more and more children are suing their practitioners for leading them down this path, as I mentioned. We have a bill that we're championing around the country called the Detransitioners Bill of Rights, because these children that want to change their back to being the gender they were born into, there are no insurance codes that will allow this to occur. They're often abandoned by the physicians that have pushed them through into these gender alterations that they've experienced. So this really is a medical tragedy that's going on. And you know, the studies that show that these children benefit psychologically from this are terrible studies. That's why even the organizations that promote these treatments agree that the evidence is of very, very poor quality to suggest that there's any benefit at all to this kind of treatment. And certainly there's plenty of evidence for harm.
And I know that you have Chloe Cole, who's a detransitioner. I know that she's speaking as part of the Do No Harm Roadshow, for lack of a better word. I'm glad she's involved in this. She's a fantastic person. It's a shame what happened to her. And her story about saying that she wasn't even given any other options. I mean, she was just told, this is what you have to do by doctors. Yeah. Scary. It's barbaric.
And our parents were told, you know, either you let this go on or you're going to have a dead child here.
Yeah.
And so the parents, you know, become advocates also for their children. They don't want their child to be harmed, but they're sold really a false bill of goods by these physicians who push this without the proper evaluation of the patient, which is what the British review of this has said. Every one of these children needs to be treated as an individual. They can't be assumed to have this gender dysphoria that can only be treated one way, which is hormones and puberty blockers and even surgery. They need to be treated as children that are troubled, vulnerable, and they need intense psychological therapy.
While I have you, Dr. Stanley Goldfarb, you have spoken a lot about DEI and the impact of DEI on medicine. Can you tell us about that? Because I think a lot of people are kind of in the dark about this idea of the effects of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what it's doing to medical schools and the healthcare industry in general.
Yeah, that's, you know, one of our two missions of Do No Harm is to fight back against DEI. And, you know, the problem with DEI is the words sound great, diversity, equity, and inclusion, but they don't mean what they normally mean when used as part of the DEI. Diversity means we're going to have more minorities in our organization, in the healthcare workforce. And it's going to exclude Asians particularly because they're overrepresented in the healthcare workforce. Equity means we're going to have equal outcomes, so we're not going to really assess people based on their qualifications and their abilities, but we're going to assume everybody's the same in terms of their ability to be physicians. And inclusion is really exclusionary. As I said, the Asian students are often excluded from many opportunities because they tend to be overrepresented in their academic performance. And we're fighting really against this. And I'll tell you the biggest sort of myth that's been put out there to justify this diversity idea is that black patients need black doctors in order to have a reduction in the healthcare disparities that exist. And our organization has looked very carefully at this issue. It turns out there are over 60 studies in the medical literature on this topic of whether patients need to be in concordance with their physician's race. And it turns out that there really is no evidence that supports this. There are papers that claim it, but there are equal number of papers that show, in fact, that when black patients have black doctors, they're less satisfied as patients with their physicians. So, but yet medical organizations have latched onto this idea and said, we must have diversity in the medical school class, and we must bring minority students in unrelated to their qualifications. Some of them are really less qualified than some Asian students that have been denied admission. This is, of course, was the basis for the famous Supreme Court case throwing out affirmative action because people are harmed by this idea. You know, there are only so many opportunities for students to go to medical school. There is a limited number of places. They can't just go to another college the way you can as an undergraduate. If they don't get admitted to medical school, they can't be a physician. And if we decide that we're going to accept people based on non-meritorious factors and simply based on immutable characteristics like their race, then we're going to deny it to people that really do deserve to have that opportunity. So our organization is fighting against this because, we want to see healthcare disparities go away. They're going to go away when individuals get better access to the healthcare system and know when to access the healthcare system. And let me just give you one little example of this business where there's a discrepancy, a disparity that is clearly attributable to lack of accessing the healthcare system in a timely fashion. So uterine cancer has become a major problem that's been increasingly recognized. There was a story in the Wall Street Journal recently that Black women access the healthcare system after they have their first symptoms of uterine cancer, which is abnormal bleeding, 8 months after the first symptoms. White patients tend to access the system 4 months after their first symptoms. Those 4 months make a huge difference. And why do they wait that long? Well, part of it is this drumbeat that the healthcare system is biased against them, and therefore there's less trust that Black patients have in the healthcare system. And this is not benefiting them, and it's not improving their outcomes, and yet it continues to be pushed as another rationale for having implicit bias training and to pushing the diversity, equity, and inclusion regimen into healthcare. And we're fighting against this because we think this is wrong. We think every patient should be treated as an individual. We shouldn't have different protocols for different racial groups. We shouldn't have students that come in because of a particular race. We shouldn't segregate students into different classes, which goes on in California medical schools at UCLA and University of California, San Francisco. We believe this is terrible. It's returning to a segregated society, which those of us who grew up in the 60s fought against and argued against, and now we see it recurring.
Dr. Stanley Goldfarb, do no harm. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.